Alright then, lads, ladies, and those of us who know better, my name is Jackson MTT Kenny, and welcome to Bold and Bright. I thought I'd kick off today by saying that I'm not actually that much of a writer. I'm definitely a storyteller, but I've found that especially in recent years I've been spending a lot more time storytelling through illustration, or storytelling through imagining very, very detailed animatics for songs while I listen to them, but actual writing, not so much. A couple months ago, I joined a writing club, specifically a queer writing club, and that's actually gotten me back into writing, specifically with pen and pencil and words, instead of just storyboards and animatics. Not to say that there's anything wrong with designing like graphic novels or anything else, that's one of my interests as well, but I'd like to get back into writing a bit more. I did plan on doing NaNoWriMo, which is short for National Novel Writing Month, which is where you write a, 50,000 word manuscript over the month of November. I had the plot set out for that, but the small issue was that it was a plot about a family drama, right at the same time that I was having my own family drama, so I decided to take some time off that story for research. I've got plenty of research now. And I thought I'd just go a little bit into how I personally design characters, because I am very much a character-focused person. I know there are people out there who like to make plots. In my experience, those are the same people who also like using a ruler to draw, and I like to say that I'm allergic to rulers, so... So, characters are the reasons that I really actually engage with something. If I cannot engage with the main character, I can't really engage with the story. I've had more than one book where the plot itself was interesting, but I couldn't connect with the characters. A pretty good example of that would be a book I read either very early this year or late last year. It was called Sister Song. I got it out of my library, and it was a story told from like 3 different perspectives, set in a historical era that a lot of people don't focus on, which was specifically when Celtic druidy stuff, Roman stuff, and Christianity were all kind of trying to smudge together in England. Very interesting. Like, one of the main characters was a trans man who was trying to get a hold of the throne so he could bring magic back. That was cool. And another one was a girl who had gotten severely burned and was now shacking up with a spy, and she had her own drama going on. And the third character was their wee sister, who spent every chapter whining that she didn't have a boyfriend. I wish I could say that there was more depth to her, or that maybe it was that classic old-timey thing of women had no rights, so she really just wants security, but nope, it really was. Every third chapter was just a slog to get through. I didn't like her at all. And spoilers for that book, but the wee sister actually dies, 3/4 of the way through the book, and middle sister gets blamed for it, yada yada yada. That was interesting, but because it was also a fantasy magic story, the wee girl got turned into a harp. A magical singing harp. And what did the magical singing harp do? Oh, it went on non-stop about how unbelievably unfair her life was and how her sister totally killed her. She fell in a river. In case you can tell, I had quite strong feelings about that book. I really liked 2/3 of it, but the third of it that was just about this teenager and complaining that, oh yeah, she kind of likes the guy down the road, but he's a bit boring. Come on, get back to the trans man with the magic stuff and the gender fluid witch. That was cool. Now, that huge tangent aside about how much I love characters and how much a less interesting character can ruin a story for me, let's get on to some of my own characters and how I design them. A lot of storytelling is just taking elements from your own life or other people's lives and then just trying to make that into something that vaguely resembles a 3-act structure. So my characters are not so much coming out of thin air as I am chopping up little pieces of my personality, giving them different aesthetics, and just sticking them all in a big tank together and seeing how they react. Something that I did wind up doing over October and November was I made a lot of profiles for my characters and plot outlines just so I could figure out, okay, what have I already planned, what have I figured out, and for me a good way to do this is to make an actual profile list situation, and these are very catered to me in particular because it's what I care about. I mostly write very character-driven narratives, little bit of fantasy, but it's mostly queer romance. So what I always wind up doing is just So let me just walk you through real quick what a typical profile for me looks like. So I'm going to be using characters for the story that I was going to use for NaNoWriMo as an example. So the 3 main characters are all members of a polycule. It's set in Northern Ireland. It's mostly based on family drama and recovering from trauma. Those were not meant to rhyme. And being in different stages of figuring out your own queerness and disabilities. So for the character profile here, I'll just use Kiva. So I've got, her name. She's got 2 last names because of the aforementioned family drama. Story role, Nate Nothing, which is the working title that I have the story saved as because I literally needed to name it something. And MC for main character, age 18, pronouns. Yes, I am a true Gen Z queer, okay? They need to have pronouns set out. So pronouns, she, her, but no real attachment to gender. Romantic interests. Not all characters have these. Don't fall into the heteronormative and matonormative rabbit hole of trying to set up absolutely everyone. In particular, she's abrosexual, which is a more obscure one. So it's basically being sexually or romantically fluid. So sometimes you're bi, sometimes you're gay, sometimes you're straight. And so for her, romantic interest just means that the 2 people that she considers her designated people, not so much the people that she is head over heels for. Because we love a little bit of diversity in our relationships. SO and ORO, that just means sexual orientation and romantic orientation. Questioning both, yada yada, she's going to be abrosexual/abro-romantic. ND stands for neurodivergencies, and in her case, she's dyslexic, autistic, and ADD, because I am physically incapable of writing a character who is not 10 mental illnesses and disorders and divergencies in a trench coat. So, description, trying to protect her people while battling abandonment issues. Likes, mechanical things, surety, punk poetry. The punk poetry thing is actually a holdover from a previous story I wrote ages ago, which had a different version of this character, but she had a thing going on with this French punk poet journalist. I still mean to use that character at some point, but it just didn't fit the story after a while, so she went in the drafts. Dislikes, styling her hair, her mom. The styling her hair thing is definitely based off me. I literally got a buzz cut for like 3 years because I just didn't want to do anything with it. That's another autistic thing that doesn't get talked about enough, but that will be a topic probably for a future episode, and I need to get that off my chest. There's her family. Another thing of writing out these profiles is just to get a couple things on page, because I hate coming up with names, and background characters are not my strong suit, so I just kind of need to have it all written down on a list here so that in future, if I need to remember, oh frick, what's her aunt's name, I can just click on it and go, huh, Nola. And a lot of my names literally come from asking group chats for a random selection of names, which I then put into a list, so if I need to name a character, I just go through the list. Like, random name generators for surnames in particular, yeah, that's nearly all of them. So, her education, I don't really write stories about schools just because I had a bad enough time in my own school years. And career, apprentice mechanic, that might be slightly based off of my dad, who is an engineer. And here's another personal thing, well, 2 personal things right on top of each other. I forgot to fill out personality type, I'll have to do that later. Top fear and alignment, that is specifically a reference to the Magnus Archives. And we don't need to dive into the lore today, but it's more their greatest fear and unhealthy coping mechanism. Because a great piece of advice I got for writing characters was you just need to know, like, what do they want, what do they fear, and what are they willing to do to stay out of their fears and get what they want. So in her case, desolation and corruption just means, she's scared of the life she's built falling apart, and she's scared that it's going to be her that makes it fall apart in the first place. Backstory, yada yada yada, that's more plot stuff. Goal, become a badass mechanical engineer, and I include things like personality types and love languages because it makes me think about these characters more 3-dimensionally. So by specifically thinking of, okay, what's her love languages, I have to go like, okay, so if this dramatic scene was happening, what would she be doing? Well, if her main love language is physical contact, she would probably be trying to get a hug in that moment. And as for personality types, I wind up filling out like the 16 personality things for all of my main characters, partly because I really like taking quizzes like that, and also partly because it will make you think just about how this person would react to different things, how they feel about different things. For me, it's not just enough to go, probably an introvert. I want to know, like, okay, how organized are they? How well do they cope under stress? A bit of a theme of my characters is they don't cope very well under stress. I also have a color thing set out because I do a lot of illustrations and I have it synesthesia, so it's just helpful to have a color I can throw in a color palette. Okay, I'll start wrapping all this up. I'm not a professional writer at all, so take all of this with a pinch of salt, especially if you're more of a plot-driven writer instead of a character-driven writer, but this is just what makes me tick and what I find most helpful. I've got quite a few profiles set out these days, actually, and maybe in future I'll go over some of them just when I'm talking about more writing in general, because I don't feel like that much of an authority on writing. I just study this stuff for fun and do it in my free time because I like it. Oh, goody, outro. So, I've got a Tumblr art blog where I go on about fan art and also the original characters, specifically some of the ones that I mentioned here today. And you can find me there on Tumblr at Blue Bold and Bright or just Jackson MTT Kenny. Alright, I'll be seeing you again Friday after next. My name is Jackson MTT Kenny, and this has been Bold and Bright.